I'll go ahead and get started. We'll kind of start off with this little webinar. I took a couple screenshots from the questions people were asking. People on the webinar were asking the presenter. And one person asked, how do you quantify near other aircraft? And basically the rule is generally a near mid-air collision is defined as less than 500 feet, a 500-foot bubble, and requires reporting by the pilots involved. Next person asked, does interfere include distract? So if a UAV is operating near an airfield or during an emergency response event, he asked, does interfere also include distract? It says it's up to law enforcement to make that determination. However, anything that takes first responders away from their primary duties may be considered as possible interference. Next question, how about an accident scene? How far away must a drone stay away from, let's say, a car accident on a highway? They said this is a case-by-case determination. There is no standard offset. It's dependent on the particular situation. For example, if a medevac is involved, the standoff could be further than a minor collision with no injuries. What's the best way to report infractions, such as flying over people at small local concerts? Please contact your local law enforcement assistance program, i.e. the LEAP program, to report any events you believe may violate FAA safety regulations, including operating over people. Let's see. Does manned aircraft trump unmanned aircraft during life safety operations or search and rescue? If SUAS are deployed well before any manned assets arrive, does that mean the SUAS has to yield to the helicopters even though their operations were ongoing before the arrival of the manned aircraft? The answer was manned operations do trump unmanned in the rules. The on-scene commander would have to take this into account when launching aircraft at the scene and coordinate the launches and recoveries. So that was some of the stuff there. They really pushed the LEAP program for basically the gist of it was to basically told the officers to do their job as they normally would. If there's any kind of incident that involves an SUAS, they were to take care of the scene in the immediate time frame, and then contact LEAP for assistance with any issues with the UAS. So, all in all, I mean, from the little bit that I probably caught the first 30 minutes of it. All in all, it was basically just going over the rules and really pushing the LEAP program. So I just wanted to kind of cover a little bit of that webinar. It wasn't really, I guess I felt it should be a little bit more, especially when educating our law enforcement and our first responders. But, who knows? We probably really need to kind of delve into that ourselves and start educating law enforcement as well. I think there's a little bit, and Dave maybe, or anybody would probably agree, that there's a lot of differentiation between the different types of drones, what they're capable of doing, what they're used for, that kind of stuff that would really be informative to law enforcement individuals. But any thoughts from anybody on that?
Yeah, one of the things that I've been seeing, this is Dave, one of the that we've been seeing in upstate New York is a number of law enforcement agencies are acquiring drones, and you can see the guys out trying to practice with them, and they're struggling a bit. So to me, the best way to co-opt these folks in a very positive way would be to help them out and get them feeling more comfortable with the gear they're using, which is mostly DJI-like cinematographic drones. And to me, that's an approach that would be, I would imagine, well received, knowing some of our local law enforcement up where I live.
Yeah, I think that would definitely be well received. I think probably countrywide, having some subject matter experts help with training their officers in the use and capabilities of the units. That would be awesome if we could provide that.
What, y'all don't?
I've not trained any. I've talked with police officers about incorporating drones into their units, but beyond that, I haven't trained anybody yet.
I've helped out individuals, not as a police officer though. They were just their own little toy. But I will be getting together with the sheriff of Orange County and talking to him because we had an incident right outside our door where a suspect fled and got in an accident out here next to our house, and he shot at the police officers, at which point they had to back off, and then he ran into the woods. And they called for the chopper to come in, and the chopper decided that it didn't want to move until daylight broke. Well, my whole point is, for the price of that helicopter and the maintenance and the pilot, every single cop car could have a thermal drone in its trunk.
Yep. And that's the thing I talked with police about here in Phoenix. Was I was dealing with the Phoenix Police Department and letting them know, hey, for the cost of putting a helicopter on scene, you could have 20 drones doing the same exact thing, and I mean, all you'd be burning was electricity.
Mm-hmm.
It's a win-win scenario, and um, yeah, I don't believe Phoenix has incorporated drones yet, but I know they were talking about it about a year ago. So I'll have to
Yeah.
check back in.
It's really a no-brainer, and I don't know why they haven't jumped on it yet. Now, granted, they would have to be 107 certified to pilot that thing, but I mean, that's only a $200 test, and most people can pass it that have
Yeah, I mean,
studied.
they could incorporate that into police academy training.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. Well, good information. So the big thing I really wanted to talk about tonight was the pending SUAS operator knowledge exam. And this is part of the 2018 FAA reauthorization, and it's going to be one of the future requirements once everything goes live with that in order to fly. Now, I know we in some of our internal discussions have wondered how that's going to get implemented, and we did get some feedback regarding who is currently involved with creating that. But what do you guys feel should be in the operator knowledge exam? What kind of information do you feel it should be similar to the 107? Do you feel like it should be its own test? Should we just be grouped together under Part 107?
Are you talking about the basic person flying,
Yeah, the
or
average recreational hobbyist person flying.
you know, I see all those questions and everything, and I mean, some of them make sense to have on there, but a lot of them don't. Like, first off, who gives a crap what the weather is and what affects what? It really comes down to, can they fly? Can they show that they are able to control it? Because, I mean, when I first started, I had a little bit of a rough time because there wasn't no videos back then. And I've lost quite a bit into trees and everything. And it took me a little while to figure out that, look, you can't flip back and forth between line of sight and FPV because that messes you up. I really think they should have almost like a DMV type thing where you actually have to show that you can control it. Of course, I think that would be more along the lines of a 107 pilot at that point. But as far as the average person, I think it should just stay the way it is with just the regular. Okay, you have 1, 2, 4, 10 drones. That's your number. But I mean, it's all kind of moot because they have no way of uh, enforcing it. Not to mention that somebody that's going to do stuff illicitly or illegally, they're not going to register anyway.
Okay. So you feel like enforcement might be an issue in terms of being able to, or having to show that you passed the test, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's look at something like, should you be required to know how to fly line of sight?
I would think so. That would be cool.
Okay. And so things like the weather, things like I know topographical maps are incorporated into the 107. Knowing how to read, uh, Dave, help me out here. What's the aeronautical maps? Sorry,
Sectional maps.
sectional maps.
So I was thinking along those lines. Wouldn't it be prudent if to be able to understand the LANC, LAANC, and which of course would require some rudimentary understanding of
But
Okay. What were you saying, Dave?
I was suggesting that it would be beneficial to, as part of the test, to have some working knowledge of the LAANC, which is being incorporated, of course, into a number of apps and is being considered for recreational as well as 107 operation, and is
Okay.
now in place across the country, right? I mean, it's in.
Yeah, it's in. It's definitely in. I know it's here in Phoenix. If it's not in, it's rolling out. I did have a schedule of that somewhere,
Yeah,
but
the
most places would be.
last piece of the country was the North Central, and that was September 2018. So the
Yep.
country is countrywide. It's up and running.
Awesome.
So I would think that that should be part of a recreational exam that says, yeah, I understand the principles and can use. Maybe it's before you fly, or maybe it's Kitty Hawk or Air Map, one of the apps that are being incorporated into the overall LANC system.
Okay.
I would say it's really good to be able to read some of the sectional charts and understand the airspace you might be in. On the other hand, I'd say the weather related stuff, at least for me and for my drone, the weather really doesn't matter. I mean, I've flown in all kinds of extremes. It really it doesn't matter how windy, how wet, how snowy.
Really?
My drone will handle it just fine.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think weather really plays a huge role into what we do. So yeah, that can be left off. So maybe some rudimentary knowledge of sectional charts.
Yeah, some basic knowledge would be good.
Okay. All right. So let's look at getting somebody into the hobby. How do you feel somebody getting into the hobby is going to be able to prepare for said test? I mean, let's look at a couple examples. Let's look at like a 25, 30-year-old individual who is getting into the hobby, and then let's look at, let's say a 12-year-old getting into the hobby. What should be the differences between those? Should they have different tests? Should they fall into the same thing? How do you feel that should work? Because here's my thoughts is that we need to eliminate the entry qualifications for getting into the hobby, if that makes sense.
I agree.
So,
That's definitely a fear, is that the test, if done poorly, would keep people from the hobby, or even just the knowledge that it exists might be enough of a barrier to say, I guess I'm not even going to try. It's not worth it. I'm not sure how we overcome that, but it's a fear I have.
Could there be something for kids like in training where they're under the supervision of a parent who has a certificate or whatnot already?
yes. So I know just for registration of drones, I think it's anybody under the age of 13 has to fly under their parent who is registered. There is already something kind of in place for that. I'm just kind of looking in terms of at what point do you, I mean, and again, this comes down to judgment as a parent, but at what point do you release said person to go ahead and take the test and be able to fly on their own? Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. And I think it just takes someone whenever they're ready on their own, I guess, too.
Well, one of the things that in ham radio they're pretty keen on is setting up the radio and first and foremost safety. You're dealing with a fair amount of power if you're high frequency transmitting, and so the test is organized to include not only the rules and general setup, but also safety. And I think those are, if we said rules and navigation, those are probably three categories that might be appropriate for a knowledge exam.
So I'd like to run with that idea for a second. So if we're looking at, obviously the FAA's rules and regulations should be on the test. You need to know those in order to, stay legal to fly. But what in terms of safety, and this is where I'm kind of tapping your guys' experience, what in terms of safety do you wish you had known when you were first getting into the hobby?
How sharp the props can be.
Lipos.
Lipos, okay, so lipo
Yeah.
safety?
Lipo safety and just, not how sharp the props are, but just how important it is to be safe flying near people.
I don't know,
Okay.
man. I've got pictures. That would have been helpful.
Yeah, I think every one of us is
Fail-safe.
probably fail safes. Okay.
Fail-safe. Making sure it
And
works.
properly setting them up, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, fail-safe is a good one.
Very good.
Good thought.
Okay. Lipo safety and charging protocol. Thank you, Miata. Let's see.
Yeah, with the current state of batteries, it's very important to know how to properly charge and maintain your batteries for a lot of different reasons.
Yeah. Josh, did you catch that one? I'm not sure who said it, but flying near people. I think that's a really good safety precaution.
Absolutely, I did catch that. Putting it in the notes on the topic sheet. So what else? What else safety-wise? I know for me, I know a couple of you guys were talking about props, so props, propeller safety.
Assuming we're working on an FPV-centric knowledge test, talking about the frequencies that we currently use and interference and radio waves and all that stuff.
Frequency
Antennas.
management, excellent. Yep.
FCC requirements too.
Yep. Okay.
Even maybe properly powering up and guidance so that you don't blast out somebody else's video.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And what about etiquette? Should etiquette be something that we include on there?
I'd
Kind
say
of
we
a
should.
race thing.
Okay. Sorry, I know my keyboard's probably loud.
Hopefully someday a lot of that is irrelevant if our technology gets better and we don't have to worry about blasting each other out of the sky, but for now that's pretty important.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right.
We don't have impound tables at our meets for transmitters. Thing of the past.
All right. Anything else you guys can think of? This is all really good stuff. All right. Well, so let's go back to. Sorry, I'm trying to get all my notes in order here as I'm typing.
On the setup side of things, one of the things we didn't talk about was a couple of questions maybe on troubleshooting, and it amazed me in the ham operating test in the general class license. They go into great lengths about troubleshooting and figuring out and determining the appropriate SWR of antenna. Now, I'm not suggesting going that deep, but just a basic guideline on troubleshooting might be some help to, again, thinking back to what would help someone who is just getting into the hobby and they're like, gosh, I don't know what, this darn thing won't arm, or it's jumping up into the air. My props are on backward, or not
the
right.
motors,
Motors are not mapped right, or and it.
Or the motors are spinning up on the bench crazy without props on. Is that a bad thing?
Yeah. Like, I got air mode on. Well, what's the problem here, right? You got it.
Awesome. I like it.
That would be like the best thing for that would be like a resource, like say like this channel or Zoe's channel or my channel, or there's a few of us out there like UAV Futures as well.
Yeah.
Where you can ask questions like that and get answers.
Yep.
Absolutely. And I think, that's definitely a resource. I think a lot of this is trying to help those beginners who don't know those resources. And
yeah, that's the whole reason I've got this channel of mine.
Yep.
You could put something in there to point people to where they can get help, or how to find a community, or how to find people in your area.
All right.
By the way, does the FPV Coalition have a website?
We do. It is not live yet. We will announce on Facebook as soon as it's live.
Oh, okay. Because I was going to put it on the information center of my website.
We will let you know when we're ready for that.
Alrighty.
And we appreciate that.
Not
let's see. What about pre-flight checklists and how to work through that?
Oh, you mean like range testing?
Yes.
I don't ever do that.
Yeah, it's probably not as big of a deal for park flying, but.
Oh, I fly everything.
Okay, so thank you, Miata. He put in the chat location familiarization. Okay, I'm not even gonna try. Just read it. And looking over areas for obstacles.
Yeah,
I like that.
Well, I do those, and I actually do a small flight where I'm going slow and making sure that I do not lose FPV or any of that type of thing. Looking for dead zones in your RF.
Yeah, I usually do that too on my first pack.
And then I rip it. On some of them. Not everything I have is a ripper.
Miata, when you put charging protocols there, are you thinking about things like parallel charging and charging, to 1C safety things? Is that what you're thinking about?
I get so many questions about parallel charging.
Everybody does.
I wouldn't even include parallel charging in that. Just safety.
Don't do it.
I think it is a bad idea myself.
Yeah, I used to parallel charge. I'm shying away from it these days. I've had it ruin too many batteries just from kind of corrupting a battery from a crappy battery, and that's never any good.
Yeah.
I parallel charge, but I don't inhale. Is that what you're trying to suggest?
I've done it. And we're moving on.
I do it for my 1S batteries.
Yep.
Yeah, I wouldn't
Yep.
mind doing that, but yeah, I just got a brand new pack of batteries, and yeah, no, we're keeping those pristine. I will say I'm probably not the best person with battery care all the time,
Oh, I'm
but
horrible.
I've learned a lot, so this next set of
Yeah.
batteries will last me a while.
Hey Josh, one of the things on that Miata's note here prompts is transportation of batteries, in particular batteries that have been destroyed, damaged, and not destroyed, but just damaged. And so, I'll just put it in the car.
Poofy
Gotcha.
batteries.
Yeah, puffed, or where we suspect
Punctured.
the internal cells are punctured or ruptured.
Sacrifice it on site.
Yeah, you got it. A lot safer than putting it in the car.
That's
Yes.
what I do. I do not mess with those.
Yeah, no. All right. Oh, you got that on there. Okay, so definitely some good info here. They decide to go poof. I like that, Miata. All right. Now, what kind of actual operational knowledge as you're flying should be included in the test? And think of scenarios. So, somebody walks into your flying field, or an airplane comes,
I was thinking the first one was that I would think of is, what do you monitor? And
right.
I stopped using a timer because I'm just watching a voltage on the OSD.
Right.
And that's much more useful than using a step down or countdown timer like we would with a fixed wing.
It's a heck of a
I
lot
still
more
use
accurate.
both, yeah.
I use telemetry and OSD, depending.
Yep.
Some of my quads don't even have OSD, so
fancy.
so if we're trying to bring along a newcomer, and they're saying, well, what the hell? I'm trying to get this thing in the air. When I'm flying, what should I be worried about?
No matter what, they need one or the other.
Yeah,
Yes.
definitely. I got all
That's
over
well said.
X-Hover because they've been shipping their bind and fly without OSD or telemetry. It had nothing, so there's no way to know how your battery is. I said, that is so stupid. Not to mention expensive.
Yeah, I mean, in this, where we are technologically in the price of things these days, I mean, it's got to have one or the other.
Yeah, I like that characterization. One or the other.
Yep. What about how to prep your spotter? I know spotter's a touchy subject, but right now it's required. So,
You mean like communication between you and your spotter?
yep, communication. What they communicate with them, what they're going to be looking for, what they need to inform you of, that kind of thing.
Look in different spots for a few seconds and then moved and shift periodically.
Okay.
So not just stand there and look at their cell phone the whole time and not communicate with people?
There you go. And the new, everyone on this call probably knows that the new reauthorization legislation allows us to fly beyond visual line of sight if we have a spotter that does have the UAS in line of sight. So a good example of that was
put your spotter in a car.
Yeah, you got it.
Oh, that
not quite in a car, but yeah, the Stingy video was legit.
That's funny. Always looking for the loopholes, aren't we, guys?
Now, if we could just get our dogs to be spotters, like they would work very well.
Oh my god.
Yeah, it wouldn't work very well.
Bark 3 times if there's a person, 4 times if there's an airplane.
They pay attention better than
most people.
Than some spotters.
Yep. What else, guys?
So I like the preparation idea of for a spotter because um, I've managed flight lines on large fixed wing events, and guys will come up and they'll say, "Yeah, sure, I'll be happy to spot," and they've got a video camera in their hand, and they're watching other pilots, and it's like, "No, this is serious. You got to put that down. You have got to watch." And then it's like, "Well, what do you want me to look at?" And well, you have to look at the sky around your pilot, not where they're flying, but where they're not flying, and what could potentially come in contact with them. So the briefing and educating of the spotter to me is that's a good point.
Yep.
Very good point.
I mean, I've had a spotter save my hiney a few times, and there are certain times, and I'll be the first one to admit, in the past I've not always flown with a spotter, but if I'm out in the middle of nowhere, there's a difference on if I'm flying with in a park or something like that. So,
or
but
with
they've definitely
with a
saved
bunch
my
of
hiney.
other pilots. Yeah, I
Absolutely.
completely agree. Yep.
I know I kind of touched on it earlier, but getting into more detail about antennas and antenna patterns and the differences between omnidirectional and patch antennas. I feel like there's a lot of people out there who don't really have a good grasp on that, and they fly behind themselves and wonder why the signal is really poor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Maybe one other thing would be new quad test procedure. You don't just
like
slap
a
the battery
shakedown.
on and yeah, well, wiggle the sticks a little bit, make sure everything's moving correctly, not just powering up throttle max and see what happens.
Yeah, a new quad free flight.
And don't forget to test it in your living room.
Right, hook it up to your computer with props on.
That's awesome.
Oh man.
Yeah, but at least you don't have to worry about it getting away from you.
That's right. Doesn't get stuck in a tree that way.
Absolutely.
Just into the drywall.
Oh, I think I would probably die 1,000 deaths from my fiance for that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I think I've got some good stuff. If you guys think of anything else, the one big part, I think we touched on it a little bit earlier. So at what point, and I kind of want to discuss it a little more, so I'm sorry if I'm going back on something. At what point do we release a newcomer into,
the wild?
basically. And I'm thinking more of the youth here. I'm thinking of, do we create a test that's more approachable for that age group, or do we keep the test standard throughout?
I do kind of
if
like.
they're gonna be...
Go ahead,
Oh,
Kit.
go ahead. Oh, I was just gonna say, I think if they're under the supervision of an adult who already has passed the test, that maybe we need a more lenient one, just as a beginners.
Okay.
But that's kind of my thought.
Yeah, but if you're under the supervision of an adult or a club, it'd be nice if they could administer the exam. So when the said person is ready, it's not just like, okay, go to this site, pay your money, and take your test, or whatever the case is.
Right. Okay, so local administration of the test.
Yeah, and that's actually in the bill up there. It says that it could be administered by a community-based organization.
Absolutely, and that's one of the
That
things
kind of personalizes it. Yeah, that personalizes it, and I think won't necessarily drive anybody away. Perhaps, who knows?
I kind of like the idea of what they're doing in Canada, where they have multiple levels of a test, and if you pass a more difficult test, then you're allowed to do more dangerous things. I don't know if that's really something the FAA is willing to do, but just an idea.
I like
that's
that a lot.
Something I do too. Yeah, I mean, if you're expert class, UAS pilot, then you can go into different areas of airspace and whatnot. That's a really good idea. That's something we can at least suggest.
what we don't want in comparison to the Canadian regulations is the maintenance and the DIY aspect of it, logs and from it's as if they just simply pulled the full scale aircraft certification and sign off of mechanical updates and applied it to all drones
Yeah.
above 250 grams. So I agree completely. They've got some nice ideas on the pilot certification, but golly, I sure don't want to replicate any of the device regulations.
Right. The repair log.
Yeah, that's
or
nuts.
if we have to have an authorized manufacturer as well as or serializing all of the frames, sign offs. It makes a ton of sense for full scale. I get that. Oh.
So, one of the questions also that I had was, what do you think? And this is kind of an idea we've kicked around internally. What do you think, or do you feel that the FAA is leaning towards making everybody a 107 pilot?
If they redid the exam, I'd be all right with it. But as the exam stands, it's like so much of it is worthless.
I agree. I mean, I've passed it, and it's not really relevant at all.
So, I mean, going back to that, should the 107 test be the exam? I mean, if it's not relevant, I mean, are you guys down with creating a completely new type of test, I guess is where I'm going.
Yeah, I was going to say not in its current form. I don't think
Okay.
This should be the way.
Awesome.
One of the reasons that this has come to mind is we look at the various announcements for comments coming out of the FAA, the safe and secure document, and 200 and some odd pages. The safe flying without a waiver for flying over people, flying at night. All of those pertain to 107 certificate holders.
It seems like the biggest push right now is getting some of the commercial regulations hashed out, and I'm a little concerned personally where that's going to leave the hobby, the recreational flyers, and I feel like they're just going to say, okay, this is good for the commercials, let's just push that over, let's just roll that over to the hobbyists, and that's my biggest fear right now. I don't know if any of you guys share that, but I'm just, yeah, that's kind of scaring me, and it's really scaring me for the future of the hobby.
I agree with you, definitely.
So, that's about all I have, Dave. I don't know if you've got anything extra for this evening.
No, I was just going to add on that last point that the approach that we're taking is that we want to focus on recreational FPV, and by pushing on recreational FPV, we want to assert a minimum and appropriate amount of the testing that we've done and the regulations that we've been talking about, and for continuation of things like Section 349 and not having those all abolished and changed into 107. So that's our direction, and happily that's the direction that the AMA is pushing as well. So we are in lockstep with them on that idea. I welcome any comments and criticisms on that.
I think the ultimate goal here, guys, is to keep the entry barrier into the hobby as low as we can possibly keep it, while providing the information to the operators of what they're going to need to know and what rules they need to follow. That way they're flying safe, they're flying legally, but they can just pick it up and go out as quickly as possible. And I think in order for this hobby to continue on the way it's been, it's got to be easy, it's got to be simple. So And a lot of this stuff, guys, this is not rocket science, the stuff that you guys gave me, but at the same time, it's great knowledge that we can pass on and can incorporate into training and materials and an exam and all this good stuff. So I really appreciate the feedback, guys.
Agreed. Same here.
Absolutely.
So anything you guys have for us? Any questions that we can answer? Anything like that?
Nope, that's about it.
All right, guys. Well, thank you.
I would love
go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to see where the Whoop class 1S is just exempt from all this. I mean, then you don't have any barrier to entry. You know,
And I think from the documentation we've seen, the FAA is copying both the Canadian number as well as the European number of under 250 grams. So I think anything that is under 250 grams is going to be extremely popular worldwide because it'll have minimal regulation in Canada. It'll have minimal regulation in Europe, and it will be a Category 1 UAS in the United States under 107, which means it just has to weigh less than 250 grams, and probably the props, I think, need to be shrouded.
Yeah.
But no kinetic energy requirements like Category 2 or Category 3.
Yeah, that would be good.
So, yeah, that's definitely something we've been talking about, is that it's going to get really, really popular, that class. And I mean, it's a great starter class for just about anybody getting into the hobby. I mean, I know I started with a Hubsan, if any of you guys remember those.
Yep.
Totally.
Yeah.
So,
and a 2-inch or 3-inch.
Nano QX.
Yeah.
I think that's what I started with, the Nano QX.
Yeah,
So-
and the new 2-inch and 3-inch with a split or a that type of technology
Had a
is
blackout.
pretty viable.
Yep, absolutely. All right, guys. Well, on that note, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. I really do appreciate, again, your guys' feedback. And next week, we're going to be talking about no-fly zones. So feel free to jump in and give us your opinions and answer some questions on that.
There shouldn't be any.
Okay.
Appreciate it, guys.
All right, folks. Thank you very
Have a
much.
good one.
Have a great night.
Yep. Have a great evening. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.